Let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, we just pray that you'll bless our time together today, that as we look through some of the things that have been going on in our world the past week, and pray that this might be of benefit to those that listen. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to call this popping the bubble wrap. And the reason for this is, and I very rarely go to see movies, but I did go see a movie this week. It's put out by it has Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla in it. Adam Carolla is a comedian, and he's an atheist, and Dennis is Jewish, but they have a video out called No Safe Spaces, and in part of the video, Adam talks about the fact that what we have this problem with our universities, and it's basically based on the fact that conservative people are being shut out of the academy. Even liberal people are being shut out of the academy, the universities and schools, because of their views. And one of the points that Adam Carolla makes is, these kids go to college now like they're covered in bubble wrap, and we need to pop the bubble wrap because they need to be they're going to have to face these tough issues. And I would say that if you take that over to the church, there's a large section of the church that really does sort of hold to a theology that, for lack of a better term, is that we'll never have to suffer because, we're children of the King and children of the kingdom of God, and we'll never have to suffer. I don't see anything in Scripture that says that we're not going to have to suffer for the Lord. In fact, there's plenty of verses that talk about that. Peter talks about that in his epistles about, being blessed to suffer for the Lord. And I think it's something in the Western church that we've largely lost. So this week, again, was another one of these weeks where we live in a very disrupted world. Everything is converging. There's a lot of things going on. So I'm going to do sort of just a general couple things of politics and that type of thing that I think demonstrates sort of it's almost as if the world is bipolar. That there's good things, there's bad things, and then there's just things that are happening that are almost inexplicable. So, for example, these were the headlines, and it's interesting that the headline, and I'm not getting any video out here. Do we have, there we go. The headlines that things are going great in the U.S. economy. Jobs are an all-time record high. And if you drive around, Columbus, Ohio is a fairly prosperous, booming area. And if you drive around, for example, I saw a large company coming over here on 270 today, and they have a giant sign out by their building there near Sawmill Road saying, now hiring. I've never seen a sign like that before. And it seems like everywhere you go, there's a help wanted sign. And it would be nice if they would say, good help wanted. Because sometimes my personal economic indicator is, and this is, I'm sure I'll get some hate mail about this, but like when I go to a fast food restaurant, and the person waiting on me has, 50 body piercings and is covered in tattoos, and they're the public face of the company, I always know that the economy's doing pretty well. Because I would think that people don't necessarily hire them when the economy's not so good, because they don't really want that to be the public face of their company, although that's changing quite a bit. But, the question is, is this a real boom? How long is it going to last? We're borrowing money like crazy. And, my fear has been for a long time that eventually the bubble burst. And the only question is when. I think the people that run things in the economy have been very clever. But it was kind of interesting. Of course, you would expect the Wall Street Journal to tout good employment numbers, but even the New York Times and Washington Post have big front page articles about how good the economy is doing. And they were sort of contrasting it as, well, this but the president's being impeached and the economy is good, and how does that happen? Speaking of impeachment, this is from the Washington Post today, the Muller report illustrated. So, we thought that the Muller thing was all over, right? That it had come out, it had not really found anything with regard to the president. There were a few people charged for process crimes for the most part. But now they have like a 6-chapter coloring book or comic book online. You can find it at WashingtonPost.com about the Mueller report. And why are they doing this? Because they're never going to let this go. They're going to continue to bring it up. Even if the impeachment is unsuccessful, do you think they're going to stop talking about it? No, they're going to continue talking about it until, well, I don't know, until the Lord returns, maybe. But I just think that this is the state of politics and journalism, so-called journalism in the world today. This is a picture of the skyline of Sydney, Australia. What they've had in Sydney is they've had a massive firestorm. In fact, they had a number of storms that have now merged. This is something, and again, they use the term when they talk about this is unprecedented. We've never seen this happen before. So Sydney, these fires are burning all around Sydney. They're threatening Sydney to some event. And in the Southern Hemisphere, which is now transitioning from spring to summer, they've had, in many areas, they've had an incredibly warm spring. And I'm talking like very hot, high temperatures that they normally only get in the summer, they're already having in the spring. So who knows what the summer is going to be like. But this is having a big impact on Australia and the thing and what they're able to. They're dealing with the same problems that we deal with in California and the Southwest and other parts of the country where they have these forest fires, and it's affecting the air quality, and they just don't know how long this is going to go on. Now, I had a little bit larger article for this, but there was a report that came out this week that the U.S. and there's like a international global test for students. The U.S. Didn't really do all that well in some areas, and you've seen these ridiculous movies or videos about how they're teaching kids to do math now. Kids can't memorize multiplication tables. I mean, you've seen these things. They're insane. And if you're teaching the kids, this is how you solve a math problem. This is no wonder why they're doing bad on tests where you have to actually do real math, not this nonsense that they're teaching kids. But Common Core has been in place now for 10 years, and they're finding out it's not doing very well. Even in Israel, they found out that their test scores are down somewhat. So now the question is, and this is a big article from the New York Times, and it's like, should we continue doing this Common Core stuff? Is it really worth it? Reality has a funny way of sort of, if I could say, popping your bubble wrap at times. This is something, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, this subject in the future. I discuss this a lot, this whole transgender, LGBT issue. I think this is one of the large, big harbingers that we live in the end times. What's going on with the pushing of this, is particularly teaching this to kids. So here's a story. This is from the Times of London, a major newspaper in England, talking about that, first of all, you see this, schools told all lessons for 5-year-olds should include gay and trans themes. This is, but understand, this is going on in the United States too. I saw an extended video, first from the Austin, Texas School District board meetings, and also from Fairfax County, Virginia board meetings. The Fairfax County ones were from, I think, 2015 or 2016. The Austin ones were just from in the last month or two, about putting in this new sex ed curriculum. And it's happening all over California. It's happening all over the United States. And the interesting thing in the discussion about adopting the sex ed curriculum in Fairfax County, one of the board members, and the vote was, I think the vote, one person on the board of 10 or 12 people voted against it. One person. And it was something that was sort of pushed through very quickly. And the board member in the clip that I reviewed, and I watched a lot of the board meeting, and it was clear that there was tremendous division in the crowd. This is Fairfax County, a suburb of Washington, D.C., where a lot of the Washington bureaucrats live before they go to the government jobs. And it was 50-50 in the crowd. And it won by a vote of 10-1 or 11-1, whatever the vote was. And it passed. They adopted this curriculum. And the board member made a great point. She said, to her credit, she goes, what is going on? Why do we have to decide this immediately? This just was brought up a month ago. She said, we studied for 10 years. We had a study to determine whether we should have a later start time for high school students. And now we're adopting this thing. It's being pushed and shoved down everybody's throat like it's an emergency and we have to adopt it now, and we haven't even considered the implications of it. And she's exactly right. Now the picture here is this is a pastor in England who worked, I believe he obviously is not making enough money to live as a pastor, so he has a job working at the school district. And I don't remember exactly what he works at, but listen to this. For Heath Waters, a comment that he shared on social media warning Christians not to go to LGBT pride events was no different from the creed he preached each week to his flock in church. The end of the story is he was fired from his school job because he had posted on social media that it's not a good idea to take your kids to these gay pride events. And when he went through the process of trying to keep his job at the school, he showed pictures of the lewd conduct that goes on at these events. And he's accused of being a bigot. And you're fired. You can't work for a public school in England if you hold this view. I could show you other examples. There is, I mentioned the legislator from Norway. She wrote a pamphlet back in 2004. Recently, she posted on social media she's from Finland. Did I say Norway? I think she's from Finland. She posted a Finnish translation, of the Bible, of a passage in Romans talking about homosexuality. She also did, so she's been under investigation for a hate crime. She was a former minister in the cabinet of the national government of Finland. She is under investigation for a crime, for posting something from the Bible. This is happening all over. So, hate to burst your bubble wrap, but this is what's coming everywhere, I'm afraid. So this pastor, 53 years old, Heath Waters, he's a pastor at Eli's New Connections Church, which has its roots in the Methodist tradition. He sent the tweet on June 1st, the start of Pride Month. And this is what he said, a reminder that Christians should not support or attend LGBTQ Pride Month events held in June. They promote a culture and encourage activities that are contrary to Christian faith and morals. They are especially harmful to children. But the consequences were terrifying for Waters, who also worked as a caretaker at a primary school, when residents of Ely, E-L-Y, turned on him in an apparent attempt to drum him out of town. Not only fired, get out of here. His wife, Joanna, was left in tears when a funeral director and an assistant came to their home asking her what arrangements she wanted for the disposal of his body. Do you understand how Romans 1 now works? They are given over to a reprobate mind. This is sick, evil, twisted. When Joanna realized that someone had deliberately contacted this company to arrange my funeral, she was incredibly shaken that someone would do such a sinister thing. It has had a lasting effect, he said. In another incident that he believes was prompted by a malicious hoax, a property firm offered to buy his home at a knockdown rate, saying that it was responding to an advertisement placed in his name, claiming that he had to leave the area in a hurry. A similar hoax led to offers for his car. A parent from the primary school where he worked stopped her car in front of his bike and ranted at him. During a disciplinary hearing at the school, he showed, this is the Times of London, he showed the images of pride events to support his concerns that some of the people attending wore sexually provocative clothing or no clothing at all. I've seen the pictures. That was inappropriate for children. Waters was given a final written warning for bringing the school into disrepute and felt he had no option but to resign from his £20,000 a year job. He had downshifted from a well-paid job at Homerton College, University of Cambridge. In the disciplinary hearing, he said the school had agreed to let him continue the two roles. He said that if his tweet on pride brought the school into disrepute, so too would quoting verses from the Bible on homosexuality on social media. The Active Learning Trust, which operates the school, said only that Waters had resigned from his post. Andrea Williams, chief executive of Christian Concern, which is representing him in a constructive dismissal case, said this is not a local issue distinct to Ely, but a growing, intolerant, and threatening trend. And in fact, in Australia yesterday at Deacon's University School of Law, they had a conference to talk about should employers police your social media for looking for ways to fire you. And this was in the context of an article where Israel Folau had received a settlement from Rugby Australia for their dismissal of him because he had tweeted passages from the Bible as well. And he got fired from a multi-million-dollar contract. He got a multi-million-dollar settlement, by the way, which he should. But this is happening a lot of places. Now, part of the goal is to see what happens to Izzy Folau, to see what happens to Pastor Waters and others, and this legislator in Finland, who's part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland. By the way, the Finnish National Charter or something said that the church, which it was a state church until about 2017, then it was created into a separate entity, the Evangelical Lutheran Church. But the church should be operated by the doctrine of God. And where do you find that? In the Bible. So she quotes the Bible and she's under investigation for a hate crime. It's shocking. Now, the question is, how does all of this come about? I would highly recommend that you go to National Review. And listen, when I recommend things, it doesn't mean I endorse everything that anybody has done. So I have this disclaimer, doesn't mean I agree with everything that they have said, will say, or might say from now until the end of time. But when somebody makes a good point, I want them, or a magazine, even the New York Times, if they make a good point, they should be recognized for making a good point. And so I watched the movie No Safe Spaces. Adam Carolla is an atheist, but he has values. Now, he can be pretty crude in the way he talks, so you just need to understand that. Now, in the movie No Safe Spaces, there's none of that. But they make some good points. So in National Review, there is an article by Madeline Kearns, and she also wrote at their Corner blog recently. And the title of her article is "A Tyrannical Minority and Silent Majority." She said this: signs of a protest against the Trump administration's reported transgender proposals at City Hall in New York City, October 2018. And I don't have a picture of it. I apologize for that. As I noted Monday in the Corner, Madeline Kearns says in her article, British journalist Jane Kirkup has done a great job, public service, in sharing a document that helps explain how the transgender movement, which many privately admit has overreached and is unconvincing, has been so successful so quickly. The document was produced by a major international law firm and is a lobbying manual for people who want to change the law to prevent parents having the final say about significant changes in the status of their own children. The manual's author advised activists across the world to use certain techniques, including attempts to get ahead of the government agenda. For instance, using gay marriage, for which there is a broad public support. This is a quote from the publication. You see a title, you see it there. Only adults, good practices for legal gender recognition for youth. A report on the current state of laws and NGO advocacy in 8 countries in Europe with a focus on rights of young people, November 2019. This was published by a law firm called Dentons. Dentons it's not just a firm. It is the largest law firm on planet Earth in terms of number of lawyers. I work at a firm with several hundred lawyers. Dentons is thousands. And they are pushing this PDF. So you can go to the article at National Review, you can go to her blog at the Corner, and you can actually download this article and read it. But what they did was very clever. They saw an opening with things like the approval of same-sex marriage around the world, not the least of which was the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in June of 2015, June 28, 2015. And we talked about it that next Sunday. I've talked about it multiple times since. I played a clip of President Obama standing in the Rose Garden of the White House speaking about, listen, we're going to be able to use this decision to change people, their opinions, their morals, their values. And some of them are going to have to be drug along kicking and screaming. Hillary Clinton, she said, I played the clip over and over. Now, she denies that this is what she meant, as if, we should believe Hillary Clinton on anything. But I believe it when she said this, that traditional values have to be changed. That was sort of, and I played that clip over and over again. I'm not going to play it today, so don't worry. But even Justices Alito and Scalia in the oral arguments in the Obergefell case on same-sex marriage in the U.S. Supreme Court said, what's the impact of this going to be? Are people going to start losing their jobs? So law firms like Dentons, they're smart people. They're lawyers. But you see the title of this, Trans Rights or Human Rights. And so they took that and they said, so just make it seem like you're just talking about same-sex marriage to push all of this through. And Madeline Kearns, there's a great interview with her that you can find if you Google it on YouTube or search on YouTube for it, Madeline Kearns, Kearns, being interviewed by Ben Shapiro about, and her concern is that, look, it used to be that this was mostly men wanting to become women. Now all of a sudden we have these clusters, and I showed you the statistics from their own data of these centers, 8 or 9 or 11 transgender centers that they have in England, the UK, and what they've seen is not just a little increase, they've seen an exponential spike in the number of children dealing with this, and they're also finding that it's clustered in groups of young girls. Like all the young girls in a particular group will be going through this. So don't say that this is just something they're born with, okay? It's nonsense. The legislature in Finland, she said she wrote a document back in 2004 for the evangelical church, and God created them male and female. Well, that's controversial, right? They're going back and looking at that document now to investigate whether that is a hate crime. And I downloaded it yesterday. You can download it. It's very well done. So this is, and again, I'm taking way more time on this than I thought, but I think this is such a significant issue. And it's not just because I hate people who suffer or wrestle with these issues. I'm concerned what they're doing. Does anybody care what they're doing to the kids? What did Jesus say about that? Harm one of these little ones, and it's better that a millstone be hung around your neck and you be drowned in the depths of the ocean. Now, that might be the end result. Doesn't mean we have to sit here and take it in the meantime. So it's troubling. So here's this is just sort of a thing on artificial intelligence that I saw. On the left here, this is a new computer chip, has 1.2 trillion transistors. Before that, the largest processing unit for a server had 21.1 billion. So 21.1 billion to 1.2 trillion is a pretty big leap. And this is being used to process things in artificial intelligence. And there was a thing called Moore's Law. And what Moore's Law said, it was developed back in the 1960s or 70s. And he was an engineer for Intel, I believe. And his theory was that computing power would double every 2 years. And for a long time, that's been true. And for a long time, people said eventually Moore's Law is going to go away because we'll have so much computing power, it won't be able to double. Well, they were sort of right. Do you see how the graph changed back about 2012? Look at what's happened since then. Now, this is troubling when you add in the fact that there are people in the world that want to control everything that you do. And we know there's a world leader who's coming who will not only try it, he will implement it, and he'll try to do it. And he'll deceive a lot of people. So the information explosion, though, I've done legal seminars on this. This is one of the impacts. This is a recent report that came out, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact report. It was a report that was done by the Atlantic Council. You can dig through their website and find it. They have a lot of interesting reports, and they talk about the fact that with the increase in artificial intelligence usage and computer power, that by 2030, in some countries, for example, Japan, 46% of the people employed in Japan will have to transition out of their current occupational category to find work. United States, up to 32%, 166 million people. You think modern life is disruptive now? And look, there'll be good things that'll be done with it. Okay, that's not necessarily the point. But evil people will use it for evil. And as Christians, we should always be on the outlook for that. Jesus himself said that the biggest characteristic of the end times would be deception. In Matthew chapter 24, he said, "Take heed, no man deceive you." In fact, he said that, warned about it four times more than anything else, that in wars, all this other stuff, 4 times more he mentioned deception. And this has a big impact. I mean, with the computing power, look at the way data has changed. And I had a similar graph. Exabytes. This is a measure of digital information in the world. There were 130 exabytes in the world in 2005. By next year, there will be 44,000 exabytes of digital information stored around the world. So at the NATO summit this week, I want to play just a short clip of this. This is from the Atlantic Council. They had NATO engages innovating the alliance, and they had a panel, number of videos, you can find them on YouTube, on the Atlantic Council channel. And this man talked about artificial intelligence, modeling, distributed computation, and virtual worlds. So listen to just a little bit of what he had to say, and I'm going to jump towards a little bit closer to the end, where he talks about, well, you'll hear what he talks about.
That I feel that, in our discussions with institutions like NATO really needs to be addressed and to be considered. And I think at its heart, it's very simple. There's a fundamental challenge in making decisions in the world that we now find ourselves in. And, the basic principles of making decisive decisions, coming to consensus, understanding a situation, have been used to great effect by government and military organizations for decades and decades and decades. I think the problem we now have is we have sort of three new and unique demons that need to be dealt with. And they kind of confound many of the challenges and problems that we face in the modern world, whether climate change, whether security, whether hybrid warfare. And those problems are really straightforward: complexity, speed, and confidence. And in particular, I think complexity. We're now drowning in information, drowning in complex, multi-domain, multimodal problems. Problems don't sit in their boxes anymore. They tend to come out and infect each other. Climate change impacts security. Migration impacts everything. There's so many different interconnected systems we now need to deal with in the modern world. And one of the consequences of that is unintended consequences, really, in many ways. An impact can impact the world in ways that no one previously predicted because of how fast and how connected the world has become. So, what do? How do we create a better model for decision making in a world where this situation exists? And I think one of the most important key ideas to remember is technology is never going to solve this problem unless we find a way to augment and improve human decision making. And combining that with AI and modeling techniques means that we can start to recreate the real world. And we can start to create profound models of the world that have utility beyond that which we have previously seen. And this is already happening. In fact, billions of people are already engaging with technology like this. They're just having fun with it. They're just playing video games. And gaming and gaming technology and virtual world solution in the way that we look to represent the world, model the world, create interactive simulations that I think have profound implications for decision makers. And the reason for that is really because the technology is going well beyond what we've previously seen. These are just examples today of games powered by technology like ours that instead of running on a single machine, run on thousands of machines. That game there, Seed, involves literally millions of artificial intelligence NPCs working together in a persistent world. And all of this is a kind of Cambrian explosion of new opportunities.
Okay, so what he called this, and you might not have heard in the thing, he says this is millions of people are playing these games. What's the game? I actually have a friend who's Fortnite. Okay, Ashland University and ostensibly Christian college offers gaming scholarships. Do you understand this? In Fortnite. They were the first school in the world to do this. Just up the road. They probably have a local campus, one of those, they run office or classrooms and have stuff here in Columbus. And what's happening is, I think what he's right. I don't think the guy went to the NATO meeting, innovating the alliance, to do a prophecy update. But I think he did. And when you add on to this, and he talked about this, how are we going to deal with this? When you have deep fake videos popping up all the time. And by the way, maybe on a big screen, it's a little bit easier to see that they're a fake, but where do people watch them mostly? On their phones. And so you're going to see, I've seen examples of President Trump saying things that he never said. And it's going to happen to a lot of us. So, this is the world that we live in, and this is changing very rapidly. I love technology, I really do. But I also know there's a dark side to it that is very, very troubling. And believe me, I'm confident that the governments of the world are ill-equipped to handle it. So, yesterday there was or Friday there was an attack at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. Several people were shot and killed by a Saudi national who was here to learn at flight school. Now Saudi has said, that I don't know what motivated him. It's like, well, what do you mean you don't know what motivated him? Go down to Mecca and get the book. But why are we... So less than 20 years after 9/11, we're repeating everything. It's insane. But not to worry, the leaders of the Western world were in London this week for the 70th anniversary of the formation of NATO. You see Trump, Macron, Angela Merkel, Boris Johnson, Erdogan from Turkey is there talking about this. And NATO's coming apart. I won't play you the clips. Trump and Macron got into it. Trump and Trudeau got into it. I haven't been able to find any videos yet of a meeting with Trump and Erdogan, but there have been some results coming out of that meeting. This is from the New York Times. A day of revolution in France. 800,000 people took to the streets in Paris to protest changes that Macron is making to the pension system. Why? Culture is aging, less people working, not enough people to pay for the pensions that have been promised to people, and the people that have been promised pensions are upset, and so now there are demonstrations to riots on the streets of cities in France, among other places. Another thing that happened in Turkey was that Erdogan, not in London, Erdogan went up to Cambridge. He went up to Cambridge to dedicate this mosque. It's supposed to be the first eco-friendly mosque that's been built. I'm not sure, how do we make our church eco-friendly? I don't know what we do. Recycle our water bottles or whatever. So Erdogan gave a speech, and at the mosque he said this: you cannot bring the words terror and Islam together. If you keep doing it, then we are condemning those who do it. A Muslim cannot be a terrorist, and Islam does not produce terrorists. You cannot bring the words terror and Islam together. If you keep doing it, we're going to condemn you for doing it. By the way, the man on the right is Cat Stevens, who converted to Islam a long time ago. Moon Shadow and whatever other songs he sang. He's a Muslim now. He spoke there about how this mosque will unify everything. But one of the things, I'm going to play a little clip of this here, Erdogan recited from the Quran.
ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا
Now, you need to know, I think I shared part of an article from Foreign Affairs a few weeks ago that was looking at dictators around the world, one of whom was Erdogan, by the way. And in his youth, he won awards for his oratorical skills in reciting the Quran. He used to stand on the bow of a ferry on his way back home and recite the Quran like this. He was well known for this. He's an Islamist. I don't believe a word he says. I probably can never go to Turkey, but okay. I don't believe what he says. So you can't I'm not going to put words in his mouth. I'm going to play a clip from a imam talking about what the Quran actually says. This is from Iranian television. First, the Quran says, an unbeliever, not an unbeliever, the host. What does an unbeliever mean? First, meaning they should be tortured to death, not just simply killed. It is the exact meaning of the verse. They'd advise us if my interpretation was wrong. You should also be tortured to death, crucified. You should be hanged. Listen up, if they've been dealt with in such ways, they wouldn't dare to protest again. And they should be punished and executed publicly and where the crime was actually committed. Am I right? The host, yes. Then it says their hands and feet should be cut off on opposite sides in the worst way possible. By the way, there was a dedication of a mosque, and these verses were read from the Quran. And I'm trying to remember who it was that read them. I want to say President Obama. I'll have to look back through my archives. This was back when he was in power, and he talked about this, and he read the passage from the Quran, religion of peace. But this is like the next verse. Okay, so he did what a lot of people do, is they take things out of context. And this is what's there. This is their own words. About a month ago, Pope Francis went to Thailand, and he went to this Buddhist temple. And what's the head of a Buddhist temple called? The Grand Poobah or whatever came out. And it said was when what other popes have gone here, they had to go in while he sat on his throne. This time he came out in the spirit of brotherhood and unity. And what Francis did was he took that human dignity document, human brotherhood document that he signed with the imam in charge of Al-Azhar University in Cairo back in February. But remember when he went to Abu Dhabi and they had that big signing ceremony? We're going to join Islam and Christianity together. Now, the interesting thing is this week there was also a meeting that he had. It was people from Argentina. It was the Institute for Interreligious Dialogue came and met with Francis, I guess this was a couple weeks ago, at the Vatican. And here's a picture of some of the people at that meeting. And at the beginning of this, he says, I'm happy to welcome all of you taking part in the meeting focusing on the document, Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together, signed in Abu Dhabi last February 4. I am pleased to note that this document, which is universal in nature, is also being disseminated in the Americas. I am convinced that the particularity and sensitivity of different countries and continents can truly contribute to a detailed reading of the document and to a greater and more effective understanding of the message it conveys. As I said during the World Conference on Human Fraternity in Abu Dhabi, there is no alternative. We will either build the future together or there will not be a future. Religions in particular cannot renounce the urgent task of building bridges between peoples and cultures. The time has come when religions should more actively exert themselves with courage and audacity, etc., to achieve world peace. Also, as part of that statement, he says this: beware of the fundamentalist groups. Everyone has his own. Fundamentalism is a scourge, and all religions have some kind of fundamentalist first cousin there, which forms a group. So after his trip to Thailand and meeting with the Council for Interreligious Dialogue, the Pope went to the church St. Mary Major, our Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, with an icon to the Virgin Mary, recently restored, and bowed down and prayed. This is what the article says. As has been a tradition with him before and after every apostolic visit abroad, the Pope visits Rome's largest church dedicated to Our Lady, the Basilica of St. Mary Major. The icon is Salus Populi Romani. The icon is at least 1,000 years old and, according to tradition, was painted from life by St. Luke the Evangelist using the wooden table of the Holy Family in Nazareth. The pic on the left, by the way, is him praying there the day after his election as Pope. Pope John Paul II was devoted to Mary. He had TTM on his coffin. Do you remember that? Totus tuus, Mary. Totally yours, Mary. There is a marked difference between Roman Catholicism, and true Christianity. And evangelical leaders like, I will name him, Francis Chan. Pastor Steve and I were talking about him today. Francis Chan had Mike Gender in his church. And I know Mike. Mike wants to evangelize Roman Catholics. It's his heart. It's his ministry. He went to Cornerstone Church in Simi Valley when Francis Chan was pastor there. This is 10 or so years ago. And he gave a talk, the differences between Roman Catholicism and Christianity. And at the end of the talk, he was gathering up his things, getting ready to go to the Q&A session. Francis Chan stood up, turned around to the crowd and said, I want to apologize to all of you here that you had to listen to this. This is documented fact. Chan will be speaking shortly at the Alpha Conference, where they will have priests offering the Eucharist, Catholic priests. It's about time people are called on what they do. I'm thinking of the verse, O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Well, the spirit of the age has. Mariology, the Pope says, helps foster dialogue and fraternity between cultures. Can I make a suggestion? Mariology, Mary herself would be appalled at this. In her in her thing in the New Testament, she says, she needs a Savior. She would be spinning in her grave. And she was buried. She was not assumed into heaven. So, well, here we go. 50 minutes in, and I'm just sort of getting to the point. So look, let's talk a little bit about the Middle East and Israel, because there are a lot of things going on here. This is typical of the UN. They had 5 resolutions this week, and you can see 92 in favor, 13 against, 61 abstention. Here's another resolution, and the vote on this one was 147 in favor, 7 against, 13 abstentions. And what are they voting on? Well, they're voting on resolutions about Israel. So in a minute, I'm going to tell you what went on in Iran this week, okay? I would present to you, if there any existed, the UN General Assembly resolutions condemning Iran for what they did. They don't exist. Hundreds, maybe over 1,000, maybe the president says thousands of people killed in Iran riot demonstrations by the Iranian government. So here's what it says. Convinced that achieving a just, lasting, comprehensive settlement of the question of Palestine, the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict, is imperative for the attainment of a comprehensive and lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. Reiterates a call for the achievement without delay of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of the relevant United States resolutions, including Security Council Resolution 2334, that's the one that the Obama administration abstained on rather than vetoing, the Madrid Terms of Reference, including the Principle of Land for Peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Quartet Roadmap. And we always talk in the context of DNO 9, well, is this the covenant that is confirmed by the Antichrist? And my question would be, might be all of them, we don't know yet. And an end to the Israeli occupation began in 1967, including of East Jerusalem, and reaffirms in this regard its unwavering support in accordance with international law for the two-state solution of Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within recognized border based on the pre-1967 borders. And there were a couple other resolutions that were also did. Now, listen, the good news was that in some of these resolutions, Germany, Czech Republic, Austria, Bulgaria, Denmark, Estonia, Greece, Lithuania, Netherlands, Romania, Slovakia, Brazil, and Colombia, for the first time voted against the resolution regarding the division of Palestinian rights at this UN meeting. In the past, these countries had abstained. This time, they voted in favor of it. So, 5 resolutions against Israel, 0 against the Palestinians. Norway, to their credit, and I've talked about this, Impact SE is the organization. You can download their PDFs. They've done many reports on what's in Palestinian textbooks. I saw someone interviewed on a news show recently, and she said, well, there's even this theory that the stuff in the Palestinian textbooks is kind of is anti-Israel. It's not a theory, friend. It is demonstrated, demonstrable fact. Well, I went to Israel and I went to the West Bank, and you went on a propaganda tour, lady. They got you. You were fooled. If you're fooled and you persist in it, what does that make you? Okay, I'm not. So Norway is cutting off aid. There's also, this is from Haaretz the other day, the rise and fall of Kushner's Mideast peace plan. We hardly even ever hear anybody talking about that now. This was a base up in Syria that Israel attacked last week. And it's amazing what's on the internet, because you can find the tracks of planes and how they flew, where they came from, where they landed, the flight path that they took. And what they were doing is they had these trucks there unloading things. And Israel said, well, doesn't look good for us. So they took them out. Saudi foreign minister came out this week and said there's an intolerable Iranian threat in the world. Even Europe came out and threatened Iran over nuclear breaches. And there's a concern. Yaakov Katz, who's the editor of the Jerusalem Post, has an interesting article, how the Israel-Iran war might begin. And he goes that it was in the back, it's the back page of Friday's edition if you want to read the whole article. But he says this: the missiles will come in low after being in the air for almost an hour, and when they hit, they will be coming just over the horizon. Because we know how this works now, because Iran is as much as admitted that they did the attack on the Saudi Arabian oil facilities, the refinery. People who will witness the attack will remember later that the missiles didn't fall from the sky. They flew at their target straight like a bullet. The drones will hit just a few minutes later. They will have been flying at low altitudes for longer, taking off in Iraq, crossing into Syria, and then across the border into Israel. The swarm of drones and cruise missiles, as it will be later referred to, will have caught the country by surprise. By the time they strike, the target will be less relevant. The Haifa oil refinery, an apartment building in Kiryat Shimona, that's a city in northern Israel, or a school in Katzrin. It's a great archaeological site in Katzrin. The scenario, while fiction for now, is one that the IDF top brass is talking about on a regular basis these days. It is being played out in the minds of IDF generals and intelligence officials responsible for watching Iran's every move from Tehran all the way to its proxy bases in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and the Gaza Strip. The model is very similar to Iran's attack against the Aramco oil facility. That Iran would like to attack Israel is not a secret. 2 weeks ago, an Iranian-backed militia in Syria fired 4 Farj 5 rockets at the Hermon Mountain in Israel. The rockets were intercepted by Iron Dome batteries. In August, there was another attack. And he goes on, and he just says, here, let me get down to the meeting. The same could be argued about Hezbollah. If the military assessment is that Hezbollah would attack Israel after such a strike, then the IDF would need to consider launching a preemptive strike against Hezbollah and hitting targets. This is like 1967 all over again. And hitting targets, its long-range missile arsenal, assuming Israel intelligence knows where it is stored, as an example, at the same time that an attack is launched against Iran. At least this way, if war with Hezbollah comes, Israel will have limited the Lebanese-based group's ability to inflict damage. Will any of this happen? That is impossible to know. Based on the frequency of visits by top U.S. military officials in the last few weeks, there is coordination going on behind the scenes between the Pentagon and the IDF. So, very interesting. And at the same time, there's the question about who's going to lead Israel. Netanyahu suggested this week, listen, have another election, but just have a runoff between me and Gantz for prime minister. I don't know if that'll happen. President Rivlin said, well, we'll give Netanyahu immunity if he resigns, and we'll give him a pardon. He won't have to serve any time in jail. And I see people say this, and I hear them say this with President Trump. Well, if you're a real patriot, you would just quit. Maybe if you were a real patriot, you would fight for what's right. How about that? When did that get knocked out of the equation? So Israel's preparing artillery drills in the north, search and rescue brigades trained all over Israel yesterday, over the past couple days for, they've been training for like 17 weeks in a row now. Their largest drills ever. Israel's defense establishment has warned that any outbreak of conflict in the northern border will not be confined to just one front, but we see terror groups from the Gaza Strip joining and fighting. Israel itself, they launched a missile, and Iran, who itself is engaged in some missile tests, which they're not supposed to be doing, they're like, well, look what Israel's doing. It looks like they're testing a missile that could hit us. So, message sent, message received. That's what they were doing. Netanyahu said this, that he's going to annex the Jordan Valley. There was a report that came out from the International Criminal Court. Remember the flotilla ship back in 2010 that they had, the International Criminal Court, they said, for the third time, they said, we don't think there was any crime committed. Now, there are videos, by the way, that show like red liquid all over, like, oh, look how bloody it was. Well, you know what? The mistake that the IDF made was that when their soldiers were coming onto that boat that was heading towards Gaza, they fired paintball guns with red paint in red paintballs. There was no blood. So she, in her report that she released, the office also continued to closely monitor relevant developments in the region. The office has also followed with concern proposals advanced during the recent electoral process to be tabled to the Knesset for Israel to annex the Jordan Valley and the West Bank. So this is, sort of a hot issue right now. Naftali Bennett, by the way, when you go to Israel and you're heading into Area A, which is under the total control of the Palestinian Authority, you see this red sign. They're all over Israel. And Israelis are not allowed to drive by that. You're on your own. And here's, so we see the West Bank and the division. The blue area on the right, map on the right, that's Area C. That's under Israeli administrative control. So they want the Jordan Valley because they don't want people coming across the Jordan Valley. I mean, they don't trust people. They will come across the Jordan Valley. And Jordan, what did they do? Did they dispel that notion that Israel has? No, they had a military exercise which simulated an attack on Israel in the Jordan Valley on the other side of the river. So, but what Naftali Bennett has done is he said in Hebron, where the tomb of the patriarchs is, and by the way, at the tomb of the patriarchs, a couple weeks ago, it was a Shabbat to celebrate Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah. 50,000 Israelis showed up for that. By the way, how many of you heard this? 50,000. So here's a little interview. So there's a neighborhood there, they're divided. You'll see some in the video. Here's just a short interview on I-24 News with Yishel Fleischer, who is very involved in Hebron, talking about the fact that the defense minister said, listen, we're going to allow Jewish settlers in this neighborhood. There's like 2 settlements, and they're just going to merge them together. You'll see how right now it's all shut down.
With me now is Yishai Fleischer. He is the international spokesman for the Jewish community of Hebron. Yishai, good to be with you. Sir, what is your expectation for when an actual new home for Jewish families in Hebron will go up? Could this happen next year, or is this something still that is years away?
Thanks for having me on, Jeff. Look, it's not something that happens immediate. We got the right to plan the neighborhood. That takes a long time in itself. It's architectural, it's infrastructural questions that have to be answered. And then after that, we'll move towards the building process, and building itself takes a few years. But we hope that within 3-4 years, we'll certainly see new families in Hebron.
Explain to me, in your mind, how significant, if at all, the U.S. policy reversal last week was, where they said no longer do we automatically say West Bank settlement homes for Jewish families are illegal by international law. Just days later, Minister Bennett comes out with this announcement. How important was the U.S. Decision first?
Well, I think those two events are really a happy coincidence that came together. I don't think the timing had to do with one another. That was the getting rid of the Hansel memorandum was years in working, and so too this neighborhood. The wholesale market has been years in planning and working. So it's just a kind of a happy coincidence, but it's maybe a godly coincidence, because the point is the same. Jews have rights in Judea. Jews have rights in Judea. That makes sense because Jews are from Judea. We've been in the town of Hebron for the last 3,800 years. We've been an ethnic majority there. We've been an ethnic minority. We were there way before Islam was even invented. This plot of land that we're going to build this neighborhood on has been owned by Jews since 1807, and we simply have land rights in this town. We have historical connections. We're an indigenous people there, and the Trump administration, with the announcement of Secretary of State Pompeo, just kind of cleared the air. yes, Jews have a right to live in Judea. It's normal, it's natural, it's organic. And of course, the heart of that is Hebron, which is really one of the most ancient places. And so a happy coincidence that after America recognized our rights to live in Judea, the Jewish people are moving forward with actually living in Judea.
So I'm going to jump back a minute. This is from Israel Channel 7 News. About twice a week, they do a show called Jerusalem Studio. They usually have three gentlemen there who are former parts of the government or the Israeli security establishment. And it's very well done. They have a very reasoned discussion of the issues. So the other day, they did a discussion on Iran. What's going on with Iran? So here's just a little bit of that discussion that they had. It's usually about 28 or 30 minutes long.
A week ago or so, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA of the Pentagon, has issued its annual Iran's military power report. And in it, it describes Iran's policy. First of all, a defensive one against its perceived enemies who are out to get it and to decimate the Muller's regime. And secondly, to become the dominant power, as they call it, a Persian Shia power in a Sunni Arab region, with Israel being the Khomeini regime's mythological or ideological little Satan, next to the big Satan, the United States, and now there is also a middle Satan, Saudi Arabia. So within this context, one should look at what happened over the last several weeks, especially on the Golan Heights, but also perhaps on the Iraqi-Syrian border, with Israel fighting efforts of Iranian entrenchment there, and Iran trying first to contain the damage, but then seeing that in order to save face, it must respond. Up to now, the response has not been very effective, but we have heard Iranian leaders, such as the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, threaten that at one point or another, retaliation will come. At the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when visiting Israel's northern front, has also warned that Israel will not sit still and will fight any Iranian efforts against it.
To what degree are the Iranians looking from the side and telling themselves, we are able to win this war?
First and foremost, the fact that the commander of the revolution or the Revolutionary Guard spokesperson or Ayatollah Khamenei blame these demonstrations on outside powers goes to show that they've received a big shock, because they know that this was an outside power. This was the people of Iran. This was very homegrown demonstrations, and it's very difficult for them to well, I don't expect them to say it, but I think it was a shock to the Iranian regime what happened. I'm sure that before the decision to raise the petrol prices was raised, they evaluated it, and if they thought that there's going to be such a backlash, they wouldn't have done it. But now the question is, as you said, they know what the situation is like at home. Are they going to look for adventures abroad? As long as any consequence of these adventures does not come back to home directly, I think they think that they can afford it. So what does that mean, come back to home directly? What do I mean by that? Whether that means they're going to get a war, they're going to bring the war back to Iran, because I don't think the people of Iran are going to support a war by the regime. Even if the regime didn't start it, people are quite, I think, aware that the regime has been looking for confrontation abroad. Or if it means very strong sanctions. Or, for example, I think the situation is going to become even more difficult for Iran if a Democrat president is elected. Because then, if the Democrats impose sanctions. But I think from now until the re-election of Trump, the Iranians are likely to be tempted to try one of the allies of America. I don't think America, because they know that Trump can't do much.
So that's interesting. So now, with regard to the settlements and some of the things that have been going on there, here's a letter that was sent to Pompeo, saying, well, we're 107 members of Congress. of the House, and we don't like what you did with regard to the statements that you don't think the settlements are illegal under international law. The House also adopted a resolution this week, House Resolution 326, supported mostly by Democrats. I believe there were 4 or 5 Republicans that voted in favor of it. There were about 4 Republicans who voted against it, saying essentially we want to have a two-state solution. Only the outcome of a two-state solution that enhances stability and security for Israel, Palestinians, and their neighbors can both ensure the state of Israel's survival as a Jewish and democratic state and fulfill the legitimate aspirations. So this is a slap at Trump. The United States proposal to achieve a just, stable, and lasting solution to Israeli-Palestinian conflict should expressly endorse a two-state solution as its objective and discourage steps by either side that would put a peaceful end to the conflict further out of reach, including unilateral explanation of, can I ask our retired English teacher here to write to Congress and tell them how to use like commas and periods a little more often. It's a thankless task, I know, that and maybe an impossible one. So this was rejected. By the way, the Squad voted against it. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, this is her speaking at the American Muslims for Palestine conference at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago this past week. She got up, and I'll just save you I won't make you watch her comment in Congress that she just said she doesn't support this resolution because it doesn't condemn Trump, it doesn't condemn Netanyahu, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She's not happy with it. So let me just look briefly at what's going on. So all over the Middle East, there's a great little video I have from the Wall Street that talks about all of these protests that are going on. You know, maybe 1 million people on the streets of Hong Kong today protesting. Many people are moving to Taiwan. I had a client many years ago. He was a Chinese national, and in 1947, they could see the revolution beginning. So he and his wife left their 2 daughters, 1947 or 48, left their 2 daughters and moved to Taiwan because Taiwan was free. And they did not see their daughters for 50 years. I knew one of the sons that was born after they moved to Taiwan and also lived part of the time here in America. And he had never met his sisters. So the people in Hong Kong know that this is the history of what they're dealing with. And everywhere else, Lebanon, Chile, Paris, on and on and on, protests all over the place. Some of the worst are in Iraq. 25 die, mowed down in the street. People searching for the missing. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the things that are going on. Here's a protest sign in Baghdad. In Lebanon, one of the things that sort of led to the protest in Lebanon was that there's a thing called WhatsApp. Some of you might use it. It's replacing cell phones. And Lebanon relies on the tax from the cell phone usage. And so people are using WhatsApp. So what did the Hariri, the prime minister, say? We're going to tax WhatsApp usage. And it's led to protests, bank runs, all kinds of things going on in Lebanon. Here's an interesting, this is an editorial from the Arab News. Pro-Iranian militias going after the Iraqi people. Here's what Khamenei said this week. Of course, in Iran this week, they came out and said, this was all a giant conspiracy. This is not real. This was the Jews, the Zionist entity, and the big Satan made these people go out in the street in Iran. And they also issued this warning: Islamic governments that support or negotiate with the Zionist regime place themselves in the Zionist camp. Fighting to liberate the land of Palestine is a duty, and compromising with the criminal Israeli regime is an act of betrayal. And here is this. This is from the New York Times earlier this week. Angry citizens protested. Iran opened fire, killing perhaps hundreds, maybe more. In fact, one of the stories was that a group of protesters in the southern part, a city in the southern part of, I can't remember if this was Iran or Iraq, Iran, had, they were protesting. And the troops came and they fled. They fled to a marsh to hide out. The troops went in and mowed them down, every one of them. Words are anywhere is that from 100 to 400 were killed by the Iranian regime. Here's Mordecai Kadar, just a little interview that he gave on ILTV the other day about Iran and Iraq.
Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq are all in turmoil right now. How is Israel not going to be affected?
No, not only this, you can add to this the fact that the demonstrators actually put on fire the Iranian consulate in Najaf, which is
Iraq,
a very important site and very important place. And this is something which, for the Iranians, is a very big, kick, because Najaf is actually the holy city, the third holy city for the Shia after Mecca and Medina. And if Iraqi Shia demonstrators put in fire the Iranian consulate in this town, it means that the Shia Iraqis do not want the Iranians. This is something which, always we
So this isn't like a Shiite Sunni conflict. This is very political. This
is political. This is against the rule. Look, the Iranians are not Arabs. Arabs have self-esteem. They don't allow Iranians, means Persians, to control their life. And this actually put behind the scenes. I would say they despise, which the Arabs look at Persians for many years already. They call them all kind of dirty names. And this is what actually is behind the scene. Not only this, they blame Iran for making their life so miserable by supporting this government, which is so corrupt. So when you add all these things together, you can find why people are so angry at Iran.
So is Iran's spread through the region at risk? Because it seems like, not long ago it was as strong as it had ever been.
Look, Iran is a strong country only because the other parties are weak. Look, Saudi Arabia got a big hit on the 14th of September when half of its oil production was paralyzed for who knows how long. What did they do against it? What did the Americans did against it? Nothing. Iran just went over. And nothing happened to Iran because of this vile attack against the sovereign soil of Saudi Arabia. And nothing happened. And so they are very much encouraged because of the fact that the world, let alone Saudi Arabia, doesn't do anything against them. Not only this, the Europeans actually are looking for ways how to go around American sanctions in order to support Iran. So they feel that they can do whatever they like. And this is the problem, because when the Iranians are emboldened, as they are by the world, they don't see any limit to their way and to the fact that they want to devastate the whole Arab world in order to subjugate it to the Iranians' aspirations for regional hegemony, and only Israel is there to face Iran.
So do you think that the European Union or the UN fully understands what the danger that Iran poses to the Middle East is?
They don't understand because they see only the business. They want to invest, they want to have revenue for them.
The problem with Iran is not with its nuclear arsenal. It's with its sub-nuclear arsenal, which is almost as destructive. They have hundreds of ballistic and cruise missiles which can hit Israel and Saudi Arabia and other places with conventional munitions, which means that no nuclear deterrence is effective against it, because Israel will have to intercept those missiles or to retaliate in kind or send fighter bombers. So it's quite a challenge, especially when the Iranians also have proxies or partners in the region, such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and those forces they have in Syria on the Golan Heights.
Well, I mentioned that some of the European countries had sort of switched their votes at the UN, but here's the National Post from Canada a couple of weeks ago saying Trudeau's Faustian bargain. You see him sort of sitting there with his unknown cabinet. Nikki Haley addressed what Trudeau and the Canadian government had done to Israel at her little talk at UN Watch. And she just said, it's just a short clip, maybe a little bad audio, but we'll see how it goes. Here's what she had to say.
Canada has been a long time balanced and fair-minded towards Israel at the United Nations. It has opposed the pull of the anti-Israel culture. But Canada is now seeking one of the rotating two-year seats on the Security Council. It faces a vote in the General Assembly. 2 weeks ago, Canada surprised Israel's friends by voting for a North Korean resolution that challenges the legitimacy of Israel. This is a resolution that Canadian governments for years have voted against. One observer said Canada is making a, quote, Faustian bargain, trading its integrity for a seat on the Security Council. I speak from experience when I say the United Nations presents many such opportunities to strike a deal with the devil. Standing up for our principles and our allies is a constant struggle.
Well, just two brief things. I love editorial cartoons because I think they sort of capture the essence of a lot of issues. And here you see, this is from the Arab News, the big meeting with OPEC this week because the price of oil is too low to support what Saudi Arabia wants to do, what Russia wants to do, because U.S. this week for the first time or within the last week or month sold more oil than it used. I mean, this is the first time I think in history, or certainly a long, long time, that this has happened. And so this is having an impact on oil prices. And this is hurting Saudi Arabia, it's hurting Iran, it's hurting Iraq, it's hurting all the Middle Eastern countries, and it's hurting Russia in particular. So Russia was able at this OPEC meeting to kind of carve out condensates like propane and liquefied natural gas from the production caps because Russia needs the money. That's where they get almost all of their money, other than some arms sales. But so here is OPEC. They're trying to limit production to raise prices. Who knows if this is going to work because the U.S. is just saying, okay, you won't sell it, we will. We've got our cost for production down on fracking and that type of thing, so you're not going to really have an impact on us. So this is having a big impact. Aramco came out with their IPO this week. It priced out at the largest one in the history of the stock markets, $25 billion, valuing the company at about $1.7 billion. So where does all this end? Look, we know that this ends. I'll just share this from Zechariah chapter 12. The burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around. It will come in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. And so we see this coming together. And I'll play this clip. I haven't played it for a while. April 13th, 2001, Richard Engel, the foreign correspondent for NBC News, at the beginning of the Arab Spring or Arab Autumn, depending on how you want to characterize it. He was interviewed when he came back from the Middle East about what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in this Arab Spring. And he had this comment.
You're back here in New York for a few days. The question I've seen most people ask you, where does this all end?
This whole movement in the Middle East, and I'm worried about it, because while people in the region deserve more rights and they want more rights and they're embracing more of the will of the Arab street, well, the will of the Arab street is also ferociously anti-Israel, against Israel. And there's many people who believe that if you empower the Arab street and the Arab street wants to see a war or wants to see more justice for the Palestinians, that down the road, 3 to 5 years, this could lead to a major war with Israel. It could also force a negotiated settlement. But I think over time, this thing ends in Jerusalem.
And many Arab countries are being pushed to enter into non-aggression pacts, not necessarily peace agreements with Israel, but non-aggression pacts. They're usually the Sunnis. And this, I think this also has prophetic implications. This is a picture of the central mountains of Israel, Judea and Samaria. Look at that. You drive up through there, every hillside terraced for farming from top to bottom. And the claim is Jewish people, they don't have any connection to this land. Crazy. And people believe that. It's insane. But look, I think Richard Engel is right. I don't think he knew that. It does into Jerusalem. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Thank you for the guidance that you gave to us in your prophetic scriptures so that we could understand the times in which we live. We pray that we will be committed to studying your word, watching what's going on, and using that as an opportunity to witness to people about the glorious gospel of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who came to earth, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, crucified for our sins, buried and rose on the third day, ascended to heaven, and who soon will return as the King. Bless us. In Jesus' name, amen.